Probably the best angle. Right. We all set here? Okay, looks like some students haven't returned from the spring break. Yeah. How do you guys go? Was it good? That's good. Well, who traveled to Brazil? Sweden. Good. Yeah. So, okay, why don't we get started? We'll talk about open number 2. Some interesting comments to talk to discuss, but we're going to be doing that towards the end of the session, okay? So we can take advantage of our distinguished guests, and especially because today we have a very exciting topic to discuss. Let me just check the sound here. Camila, can you hear us better with the microphone here, or it doesn't matter? We're just adjusting the.
I can hear you guys very well right now.
Okay, excellent. Yes, and this is one of the most awaited sessions of the semester, conservation and environmental policy in Brazil. And the main reason it is because some of you are particularly interested in this topic, and they were very excited to hear about our speaker today when they read the syllabus. We have some papers here, so if you want to write down, take some notes, I have mine here. So, as we know, environment and climate change and some of the topics that we're going to be addressing today were not necessarily a priority in previous years in Brazil. When we think about political context and we think about policy issues, things seem to have changed right now. Brazil is going to be hosting the COP very soon, and we are very privileged to have with us today someone who's not only knowledgeable about the topic, one of the main experts in environmental policy in Brazil, but who has in particular, apart from his academic background, vast experience as an operator, and also someone who spent several years in the nonprofit sector. Professor José Maria da Silva, he comes from Miami, where he's a tenured professor and chair of the geography department at the university there. But previously, and that's how we first connected, he had several positions at the Conservation International, one of the major NGOs in this segment. And his last role was as executive vice president at the organization. So we're going to have a lot of very exciting stories after we shut down the camera and when we enter the classroom discussions following Chatham House rules. And we're very lucky to have someone on the science side. So I'm very pleased to share with you that Professor Ana Carolina Carnaval from the City College of New York joined us as a commentator, and she brings the science background. So José Maria is going to be setting the stage for a discussion focused on policy, and it's always interesting to hear someone whose work is impacted by what we are going to be discussing today. All right, so without further ado, let me hand over to José Maria, and thanks so much, José Maria, for being with us once again. José Maria has been guest speaker here in several occasions in the past, before the pandemic, during the pandemic, online, and now back in person.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Sidney. Thank you all. And it's always a big pleasure to come to the university. And every time Sidney asks me something, he doesn't ask, it's an order. So every time I say, you have to come, say, okay, I have to find time to come to Colombia. And one of the reasons that I like to come is because I get a lot of feedback from you. So let's have these discussions, ask questions, and I try to respond to all the questions that way as possible. And sorry for my English in some way, because I was speaking Portuguese before, and I explained to Sidney that I should not speak Portuguese before I start speaking English, because I start to mix up the languages. Anyway, I'm going to talk about conservation and environmental policy in Brazil next.
Okay. I think we should be good to go, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
but you know, conservation and the environmental policy in Brazil is really broad. So I decided to focus only on one idea. Today, I'm going to focus on one policy idea that for me is the most transformative policy idea in Brazil in the last decades. It is zero deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. Next. What I'm going to do, I'm going to explain how this idea evolved and we'll discuss a bit about the feasibility to get this idea implemented on the ground. Next. Next, yeah. First, let's define what's the Brazilian Amazon, because there are many different concepts of the Brazilian Amazon. Next. So I'm going to define the Brazilian Amazon as a biome. It's an ecological region defined mostly by the presence of the tropical forests. Because there are other definitions of the Amazon. There's a political definition of the Amazon, for legal Amazon, that includes areas that are not tropical forests. That's a quick part of the Cerrado. That's a tropical vegetation that's located in the south part of the Amazon. But here I'm going to use the definition of the Amazonian biome as defined by the national government. This region has 4.2 million square kilometers. It's home of 26 million people. 72% of the population living in cities. And the geographer Berta Becker, she described the Brazilian Amazon as an urbanized forest. It's basically because most of the population that lives in the region live in the cities. Next. So let me explain the origin of the idea of zero deforestation. Next. In 2003, 2004, the annual deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon reached a record. You can see it was relatively low, it was declining, but 2003, 2004, there was a peak of deforestation. And everybody was concerned about that. It was like something that was not expected. It was a big surprise for governments and for the international public as well. So everybody started to be concerned about that. There was a big discussion in Brazil. What Brazil should do in order to avoid this kind of thing. Next. Next. So because of that, I published a paper together with two colleagues of mine. They are researchers of the Guild Museum this time, Irma Vieira and Peter Toledo. And we wrote a paper in Portuguese. We decided to publish in Portuguese in one Brazilian journal because our focus was to present the idea to the Brazilian audience. We didn't publish in Science or Nature, even though the ideas in this paper would be published in these journals, international journals. But we decided to do in Portuguese and focus on the Brazilian audience because we wanted to make a big splash, to propose something that had never been proposed before. So we published this paper. It's called The Strategies to Avoid Loss of Biodiversity in the Amazon. And this was the first proposal for zero deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. Next. In addition to have the idea, in addition to propose zero deforestation as a policy, we also propose a new way to measure the impact of the deforestation. In the past, next, for example, in 2004, the deforestation achieved 26,000 square kilometers. And the Brazilian journalists, in order to describe the impact of deforestation, they used soccer fields. So they say, in the Brazilian Amazon, we lost 2.1 million soccer fields. So people could have an idea about the size of the deforestation. But we decided to change. Instead of use the soccer fields, let's use living beings. How many individuals of different species we lost because of the deforestation. And you did the calculation. In 2004, for instance, we lost between 1.1 and 1.3 trillion trees. Can you imagine it? It's really hard, but really was a huge number of trees. We lost between 43 and 50 million trees. We lost between 1 and 2 million trees. So when people start to see that, and oh my God, that's big, big impact. And they start to think a different way about deforestation. So next. The idea of zero deforestation or proposal has one assumption and 4 concrete actions. Next. The assumption was that Brazil had all the key policies and resources required to implement the proposal. Next. And the key policies are, next. Brazil has a national system of conservation units for protected areas, SNUC. And the SNUC is a very powerful and very nice policy. It's one of the most, comprehensive protected area policies around the world. Because this national system, first, they created a national systems that means that all protected areas in some way should be connected. They have a decentralized system. The legislation suggests that the system could be decentralized, so municipalities, states, and national governments could create protected areas in such a way that complement one each other. In addition to that, they created basis for creation of public protected areas and private protected areas. So it's a very comprehensive system of protected areas. I think that's unique to Brazil. For example, the United States doesn't have a system. The system in the United States is completely fragmented. If you look and you try to understand what's going on in terms of protected areas in the United States, you don't have this information. But Brazil is different. Everything is connected. Everything is organized in one single system. The second policy was the indigenous land policy. In Brazil, the indigenous people have the right of their lands. If of course, there's a need for anthropological studies, additional field studies, and if everything is complete, the indigenous people have the right to have their lands. That's unique also in Brazil. If you compare to other places in South America, in the Amazon, usually the indigenous people, they don't have the right of their lands. Or when they have, the areas are really small, that are not large enough to maintain their lifestyles. So Brazil have that, and Brazil was implementing this policy. Next. The third policy was the forest code. Forest code is very important. Again, it's a unique policy of Brazil. Brazil is one of the few countries in the world that define what the landowner can do in their lands. For example, Brazil defined, the Brazilian legislation forest code says that 80% of the vegetation on private land in the Brazilian Amazon should be protected, should be set aside for protection. You don't have that in the United States, for instance. If the government wants a farmer to protect natural ecosystems in their lands, your government has to pay, and pay a lot. In Brazil, it's different. You have to protect natural ecosystems. And the third one, next one, Brazil also has a lot of power to convince the agricultural sector, the major driver of the deforestation, to change the behavior, because most of the money that support the agricultural system, at least during this time, was came from the federal banks. So the federal banks could use the agricultural credit policies in order to stimulate, to support better environmental practice by the agricultural sector. So in the end, by this time, Brazil had all the policies that you need to have in order to move towards a zero deforestation program. Next. The four concrete actions that we proposed were first, the idea was to consolidate all the existing conservation units in indigenous lands to one big system. So basically, we need to implement these conservation units and indigenous lands. Second, a significant portion of the Brazilian Amazon belongs to the public, belongs to the governments. They are public lands. So the idea was to declare all undesignated public lands in the Brazilian Amazon as conservation units and indigenous lands. So there was no cost for the government because they are public lands. Next. At the same time, you need to create a new technology and new programs in order to use well the lands that had been deforested. In the Brazilian Amazon, the areas that have been deforested is equivalent to the size of France. So can you imagine if you use an area of the size of the France in a good way? Because do you know the Brazilian Amazon can be an economical superpower by using well the resource, the land that is already available, that has been already deforested. Next. And of course, in order to support all this structure, this large regional structure of conservation, we needed to build a strong science and technology network to guide implementation, what I call sustainable territories. Basically, a large places where nature and people can live together. So this is basically the four actions that we propose in the plan. Next. The proposal was well received by the scientific community and by some NGOs. Some NGOs said, no, this is impossible. It's harder to get. But the scientific community said, no, we should go, we should support it. Next. Some of the proposals principles were adopted by governments, national and state level, in their policies to control deforestation. Next. I personally worked with 3 governors. We are there, closer to Schwarzenegger, is the governor Valdez Góes from Amapá. I work with him, and Amapá today has 73% of the state within protected areas and indigenous areas. That's a global reference. Close to Valdez Góes on the right, I think, the governor Eduardo Braga. He was the governor of the Amazonas during this time. And he was outstanding. He created millions and millions of hectares of protected area in his government. And he created a new policy in his government called Green. He was one of the first governors to have a very clear policy, state-level policy focused on sustainable development. And at the top, there's Governor Simão Jatene. He was the governor of Pará. And he created, I think, at the end of his government, he created a large mosaic of protected areas in the world. Today, for example, if you see the Guiana Shield, that's the north part of the Amazon, most of the Guiana Shield is protected. We are talking about millions and millions of hectares. Millions and millions of hectares is protected because of Governor Jatene. It's there. Everything is there. So these 3 guys, they were very strong leaders, support the idea that you should create protected areas and change the way that you think about the development of the Amazon. Today, Braga is senator. I think Jatene retired. And Valdez is the Minister of Regional Development and Integration of the current government, the current federal government. Next. So because of the actions of the government and civil society, of course, everybody worked together since 2014, 2015, deforestation has declined a lot, but has not ended. Next. This is a graph demonstrating that after 2005, deforestation really went down. People say, it's because of the agricultural policy. They say there's lots of people write a lot of papers about different things. They say, it's economics, it's market, it's the role of companies. Was because of the protected areas. When you create protected areas, you take land out of it. And people don't want to go there. And if you take lands out of the market, people have to use the lands that they have. And that's in some way can create a positive feedback in order to promote sustainable agriculture. And in the end, it's going to reduce the deforestation. So you can see that deforestation went down by a combination of different factors. But for me, from my perspective, it's because the intense work that the government did to create protected areas and indigenous space. Next. However, after some years, the idea of zero deforestation was sidelined because there was not enough investment to implement all these protected areas, to implement all these policies connected to sustainable development. And as you know, if you don't implement the policies, people get very suspicious about the policies. So because of that, in some way, people started to forget about the zero deforestation. And even the scientists, they say, you have to find a common ground, you have to reduce deforestation, but you should keep some deforestation going on. So there was different ideas. I've never changed my mind. My mind was, we should always start for zero deforestation, because there's no excuse to keep deforestation. Amazon. Next. However, and this was a big surprise for me, in the last presidential election, President Lula was elected. Next. And one of his commitments was to achieve zero deforestation. That's part of the national policy right now. Next. In order to implement that, the Minister of Environment, Marina Silva, she announced the creation of a special secretariat. And the goal of the secretariat is to combat deforestation and promote territorial planning in the Amazon. It's basically to promote the idea of the sustainable territories that I described to you before. Next. And she said, when she announced the new secretariat, that when you achieve zero deforestation, you no longer need the new secretariat. The idea was the secretariat was created to be a temporary position. So they are really, really committed to achieve zero deforestation across the entire region. Next. And Marina named André Lima, a lawyer and environmentalist, as a new secretary. He's a really good guy, and he has all the technical skills and capacity to get things done. So I'm very happy with the political movements so far. Next. The question that everybody is asking is, can the new government achieve zero deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon? Can the new government get things done? Next. As any policy, the zero deforestation plan must pass through 3 tests to be successful. The idea has to be social feasible, political feasible, and administrative. So you have to have these 3 feasibility tests in order to see if the idea can be implemented. Next. So let's evaluate social feasibility of the idea. Next. Social feasibility in the Amazon. I'm from the region, so I know my folks need improving living standards. If the policy is improving living standards some way, everybody's going to support. But if the policy is not delivering good living standards, there's no feasibility. Next. People who are working against the idea of zero deforestation, they propose three hypotheses or ideas in order to undermine the concept of zero deforestation from a social perspective. Let's go through these ideas. Next. First one is deforestation leads to agricultural expansion, with, in turn, leads to better living standards. So the idea is agricultural expansion is good for people. So deforestation is just a consequence of the transformation of the economy in the region that used to be extractivist, and then now it's become based in the agriculture. Next. I test the idea together with two friends. We published a paper about that. We evaluate the impact of this percentage of the local GDP in agriculture. And we found very interesting results. If the municipal, there's an inverse relationship between GDP, percentage of the local GDP in agriculture with the local living standards. So agriculture not included in this standards. According by Amazon. Next. And that makes sense. Agriculture today use 14% of the region. That's really large, but produce only 13% of the region GDP. It's absolutely nothing compared to the area that is used for the economic activity, which would do much better than that. Next. The second idea that people propose against zero deforestation is the conservation units in indigenous lands. When the government creates conservation units in indigenous lands, they constrain the local economic development because the municipalities, they don't have space to develop new economic activities. And again, we didn't work. Next. We published a paper about that. She was testing this idea, and there is no support for the negative association between percentage of the municipality allocated to conservation and economic development. In fact, there's no relationship at all. So the second hypothesis proposed by people who work against the deforestation doesn't have any support. Next. And it makes sense because most of the economy of the region, 87% of the GDP is concentrated 0.1% of the region. The economy is concentrated in the cities. That makes sense because cities have most of the people, and in the small areas of industrial mining, like the areas of Vale do Rio Doce and other companies that use a very small area but produce a big portion of the region's GDP. And that's fascinating. So you can see 80% of the economy of the region is concentrated in 0.1% of the land. Next. Also, people say, but there's no public support to conservation. They always say, no, there's no public support to conservation. People don't like conservation because conservation constrains their freedom to do whatever they want. Again, next. We test this idea in the new frontiers in the Amazon, the state of Amapá, and we found that most of the population support protected areas and conservation. These numbers are still high, but declines when you move from the cities to the rural sector. In rural sector, the support is high, but it's a bit slower than the urban settings. And when you talk about the rural people, why they don't fully support protected areas, they are very clear about that. We support protected areas, but the government does not implement this protected areas, so you cannot see the benefits of this protected areas. So in general, this kind of research was made in different parts of the Amazon, and it's always the same results. There's a huge public support for protected areas. So next. Therefore, I think, based on this evidence, I think zero deforestation is socially feasible. I know my folks with the Amazon, they want to protect the Amazon. Even people who are who were born outside of the Amazon, who moved to the Amazon to do this test as well, they are basically interested in conservation. They think the idea to protect the Amazon is something that should be supported. Next. So let's evaluate political feasibility. This is a bit more complicated. Next. How we can evaluate political feasibility. Next. I think the results of the last presidential election can provide some clues. Next. This is the results of the election for president in different parts of Brazil. In blue, of course, is Jair Bolsonaro. In red, pink, Lula. If you see in the Amazon is divided. Next. In the municipalities that have, one before. In the municipalities that have forests, people voted to Lula. In the areas that have high rates of deforestation, people voted in Bolsonaro. So it seems there's a regional divergence in terms of political support to the deforestation program. Next. However, if you check what the governors of the states are doing, it seems there is some convergence towards sustainable development. Next. Before the elections, for instance, the governors of the states of the Amazon, they sit together, they created a consortium, they called Consortium Legal Amazon. And even they developed a program they called Green Recuperation, Green Economic Recuperation for the Amazon. And they are really working hard as a group in order to promote sustainable development and maintenance of the forests across the entire region. So even though at the election level shows some kind of that divergence between the different municipalities, when you talk about the governors, it seems they are more or less connected. They are trying to promote some kind of development based on the maintenance of the forests across the region. Next. So right now, I don't have strong evidence. What I can say is, it's incest. What's the political feasibility? I don't know right now. The election shows something, but the actions of the governors show something completely different. So we have to wait a bit. Next. So let's evaluate the administrative feasibility. When you talk about administrative feasibility, we are talking about the capacity of the government to implement, including the technical capacity to get that started. Next, for me, administrative feasibility, I'm very pragmatic about this, is associated to budget allocation. For me, there are only two types of policies. Policies with money and policies without money. Policies with money get implemented. Policies without money don't get implemented. So people always say, oh, the policy failed. And it's failed, of course, but not implemented. So that's the basic division. I'm very pragmatic. If you want to know the priorities of a government, check the national budget. Very simple. If you want to know the priorities of a company, check how the company invests in different areas. If you want to know the priorities of a family, check how the family invests in money. Very simple. You track the money, you are going to see the priorities. So administrative feasibility for me is about public budget. Next. If that's the case, so you have to have an idea about how much does it cost to protect 80% of the Amazon within conservation units and indigenous groups. Why 80%? Because all the science behind, ecosystem science behind, all ecosystem science in the Amazon in the last several years, they have suggested that if you don't protect 80% of the Amazon, maybe the region is going to collapse from the ecological viewpoint. And there will be lots of species and key ecosystem processes, including rainfall, maintenance of the climate, soil, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to talk more about this. So that's why you have to protect 80% of the Amazon in different types of forests. Next. And again, I did my homework. Next. I published a paper. It was the first course estimate to protect 80% of the Amazon. Nobody did that before. So let me show you the results. Next. We ought to protect 80% of the Amazon. We have to protect 2.8 million square kilometers in new in conservation units and indigenous lands. These are public lands. They are already public lands. They are there. The government just needs to create them and maintain them. In order to protect these 2.8 million square kilometers, next, we need between $0.4 $0.7 billion in establishment costs. That's basically the research that's required to create the new protected areas, to establish the infrastructure for indigenous lands and protected areas, etc. That's the basic cost. This is the only one you need to make these investments once in order to create this system. And after then, you have to allocate $1.2, $1.9 billion a year in management costs. I call that minimum management costs. That's what's required in order to maintain this 2.8 million square kilometers. Next, in my view, this money has to come from three sources: national budget, international collaboration, Norway, United States, France, Germany, etc. They're interested to collaborate with Brazil, and philanthropy, Bezos Foundation, all the NGOs, etc., etc. These three sources, they have to focus their actions on the public lands to protect the public lands. But in order to protect 80% of the Amazon, you need also to protect the forests in the private lands. Next. So in order to complement these systems, you need to protect around 0.8 million square kilometers in private land. This is not a big thing because of the forest code, the private sector has already to protect their land. What they're asking is just to protect, they should upgrade the level of protection to private reserves. That's a system, that's a mechanism that exists in the Brazilian legislation that makes the protection of the private lands something that is permanent and that's going to complement the system in the protected in the public lands. So you need the private sector has to protect 0.8 million square kilometers. Next, in private reserves. The cost is $0.5, $0.8 billion to establish the system, the private system, and between 0.3, 0.5 billion in management costs. That's my estimate. For these parts of the conservation system in the Amazon, next, you should use market mechanisms. Carbon credits, biodiversity credits, transactions between the landowners. The sky's limit is the limit. There are many ways by which new financial mechanisms can be created in order to support the creation and maintenance of this large private conservation system across the region. Next. Are these costs high? Let's see. There was a study that some researchers did, and they found out that in order to protect the lions in Africa, all the protected areas that are relevant for the lions, the global community has to spend between 1.2 and $4 billion region. So to protect Amazon is not so different. In fact, you're going to protect more with a low price. Next. Right now, one of the best conservation systems in the world is in Europe. It's called Natura 2000. It's wonderful, and the government is still expanding the system. European governments spend every year $60.3 billion. At $6.3 billion in order to maintain the system. So in the end, if you compare the Amazon with the European system, it doesn't cost. Next. So you can ask, can Brazil afford to conserve the Brazilian Amazon? Let's see the numbers. Next. Next. The national budget is almost $1 trillion. It's a lot of money, right? So to take $2 billion to protect the most important tropical forest in the world is not a big deal. Next. The 500 major corporations in Brazil, the profit 2 years ago was $63 billion. The private sector, it's not a big deal. So if you think about if the private sector is going to just to support the private parts of the plan, they have the money, they have the capacity to innovate and create mechanisms to protect a part of the region. Next. And there was a journalist, she did a very nice work, and she interviewed me about my paper, and she did some additional research, and she found out that to conserve 80% of the Amazon costs less, is 3 times cheaper than the value of the amount of money that the government gave to the congressmen to allocate it in their places. In the municipalities. So in the end, it's not a problem of lack of the money is there. It's only a question to use well the resources that you don't invest. Next. So in summary, next. Zero deforestation is socially and administratively feasible. Brazil has the capacity to get things done. Next. To make zero deforestation politically feasible, the only way, from my perspective and my experience, is the government must solve the financial bottleneck. Because if the money starts to flow to the protected areas and people see the results of these investments, the political support is going to increase. And everybody will love the experience. Next. So in general, I think Brazil and the world, Brazil can do alone or can do together with other countries, can achieve zero deforestation in one of the world's most important tropical forest regions. If, and only if, investments at the magnitude of the challenge are made across the region. As I say to you, there are only 2 types of policies, policy with money and policy without money. If you want to make the difference, this is the kind of policy that you must have. Thank you.
To be honest, when Jose and I were discussing this presentation, I was skeptical that we would be able to do it in 40 minutes with 60 slides, but yet now, well, no, he's a great professor, but a great storyteller. So much, that's the word, being so concise. And before we enter the Q&A part, we have the privilege of having Professor Carnaval here with us, who will provide the perspective of someone who's a scientist. Their focus and research interests are related to evolutionary biology. But and one of the numbers that Professor Jose mentioned, like was staggering, the number of trees that were destroyed in the Amazon. I can't imagine how much that would impact like your own work, Professor Carnaval. So please. Please
Yeah.
share your thoughts.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me and it's fun and hello, everyone. It's nice. We have some Carnival lab people here as well, so these are all Brazilian students who are here working in our lab. Yeah, so we are interested in biodiversity patterns in our lab at City College, so we're a few blocks up the road. We study how different animals and plants are distributed across the world, but because I'm Brazilian, we work a lot in Brazil. Historically, we work more in the coastal forest than the Amazon. I always found the Amazon very, very complex and difficult to study. But Zé has been a force in my scientific upbringing, and I've been reading more and more. And recently, I even got a paper out about the Amazon gold figure. And one of the things that Zé brought up in this talk that I'm not sure was completely developed because his focus was on the implementation of the plan is really the importance and why would the scientific community be backing up a plan like this. And I can talk a little bit about that. So it's interesting that when you're growing up in Brazil away from the Amazon forest, you have the impression that this is a ginormous tract of land and every piece is similar to the other piece and the piece next to it. And this is a misconception, really. And I think the whole world shares this vision that this is a ginormous forest and it's very redundant. The tract is very redundant. But what scientists have uncovered when they started studying the Amazon is that the Amazon is very dynamic from a geomorphological, from a hydrological, from a biological perspective. It's very diverse and it's not homogeneous at all. You have different areas of the Amazon holding different species of plants and different species of animals and fungi and bacteria. So the argument that if I protect one bit of the Amazon, I'm going to protect it all, it's flawed. So in that sense, it's a good notion to give out to people usually, because there's always this misconception, or there's often a misconception. When I shared your impressions, Sydney, when you talk about, let's think of how many trees we're losing, in my mind, immediately I thought of, let's think of how many genes we're losing. So a lot of the thinking in biodiversity science today attaches looking at animals and plants to what are the genetic resources that those organisms are bringing, and what are the, we call them traits, what are the ecologically relevant things that they have. This is a tree that can go up and provide shading for other organisms and create habitat for other organisms. Or this is a fungus that is really important in eroding rock and making a fertile soil, decomposing material in the soil, for instance. So these, we call this multiple dimensions of the biological diversity. They're really heavy in the Amazon. Zé made one example, transferring a soccer field into how many trees. But scientists would also think of how many different ecological functions are you losing? How many different genes are you losing? And these have a huge value in terms of how that ecosystem functions. The other importance of the Amazon, going beyond the animals and the plants and the fungi and the bacteria that are living there, is what this system as a whole does. So one important thing about the Amazon in this sense is that conserving the Amazon will not be something that is useful just for the people who live in the Amazon. Scientists are demonstrating time and again that all of the cycles that happen, the natural cycles that happen in the Amazon, the geochemical cycles, the hydrological cycles, what happens in the land between the land and the atmosphere and the water. It regulates climate, not only there, but across the world. And it's tremendously important for other areas of Brazil too. So Zé has a very good argument with the government saying, look, this policy is Amazon centric, but the impacts are countrywide. And what I think one of the coolest ways that the Amazon contributes to regulation of ecosystem processes in the whole of South America is through what we call flying rivers. Not sure if you guys heard of this. So the Amazon, the hydrological cycles in the Amazon, they contribute to regulating the circulation of air masses throughout all of South America. So if you change the pattern of rains in the Amazon, it actually impacts the rains throughout the south of the country too. So we call this connectivity of moisture through the atmosphere, the flying rivers of the Amazon. Isn't that poetic? Like I got goosebumps because it's so poetic. It's beautiful, right? So it's a very powerful narrative. And I'm gonna stop with this word. I know I only have 5 minutes, I'm gonna stop right here. But throughout your talk, it became very clear to me that the argument is clear and there is a way to solve the problem. When I look at it and I ask, why isn't it done? To me, it's really about, it's because the narrative going, in the public realm is different from the data that we have. The narrative is that, forests mean lack of civilization. Forests mean low GDP, right? So I applaud that you are doing all of this, but I think that what we need to have right now is a conversation with the humanities and really say, how can we make this narrative be discussed, and I don't know, accepted by other people, by everyone, so that we can make this real. So I'll stop right here. How's that?
Excellent.
Is that a good,
Thanks so much, Professor
good
Carnaval.
enough?
And this is particularly relevant for this audience because most of our students will not go into academia or they will not pursue academic jobs, right? They will be practitioners, they will be influencing decision makers, and they will be executing several of the policies that we are discussing here today. Right? So I think one of the key takeaways for all of us is that how we translate science, how we translate all those ideas in a way that we're going to be able to convince decision makers about the relevance and the feasibility of those recommendations. So when you talk about three dimensions that professors have mentioned, like social, the political, administrative, I think that the social and administrative are much more tangible for us. The political aspect probably involves more arts than science. And I think it's something that we all should be thinking about. And when you talk about some of those challenges, it's very important to discern myth and reality in order to have an open conversation, right? Unfortunately, in the past few years, I would say that a lot of the debate was not shaped by reality, but about passion. So why don't we start deconstructing some of those controversies? The first one is one of your charts show that deforestation actually decreased in the past few years, right? There was an increase before Bolsonaro was elected, and during his administration, we saw this decline. How do we connect this to the public debate that Bolsonaro was destroying the Amazon?
Yeah, that's a very good point. In fact, there was the deforestation increases a bit. I think I went to see in the last year there will be an increase. I have to check the number. There was an increase because before the election, people and the increase a bit, and most of the deforestation is happening on the undesignated public lands. What was the strategy? Let's go, let's deforestate, let's occupy. And let's wait to the next government that these people, the next government is going to give the land to us. So it was an attempt to create a fact so they can, in some way, the government can have to create a pressure on the government so the public lands will become will transfer to private lands because the others have been already developed. So in some way, that was what's going on in the Amazon. If you check the numbers, most of the deforestation the last 2 or 3 years happening in undesignated public lands. And that was an attempt to basically create a political fact in order to get the land. So that's the connection. And of course, this was in some way supported by government Bolsonaro.
And the second myth that we tend to we kind of often hear is the fact that agribusiness plays a big role in contributing to deforestation in the Amazon.
The agribusiness. Some people in the agribusiness, they want to follow the law, to maintain legal reserve of the pay, to follow the forest code. Sometimes they are investing in great private reserves. But there's other sector of the agribusiness that they don't care about that. And they are the ones who are opening the new deforestation plants across the region. So, like any other sector, you have the good guys and the bad guys. The problem is the good guys have to take action and say, look, these guys, they don't represent us. But they don't do that. And that's what, creates a bad image to the Brazilian agribusiness. In fact, if the Brazilian agribusiness wants to be really a model to the rest of the world, they should create the largest private conservation network. And they have everything to do it. If you want to protect the Atlantic forest, the Cerrado, Caatinga, all the other biomes in Brazil except the Amazon. Let me explain to you. Most of the lands that's still covered by natural vegetation in the other biomes in Brazil outside of the Amazon belongs to the private sector. The public land, there's no natural ecosystems in public lands outside the Amazon. So that's what I always say to the agribusiness people. If you want to show that you are leader in sustainability, create the world's largest private conservation system and show how this can be done. Just follow the law and just update your legal protected area legal reserve to private reserves. Just do it. You are going to become heroes around the world, but they don't want to do it.
And
Why?
it's not just the agribusiness, right? Remember, we talked to bankers,
Yeah,
right? It's all
the
corporations.
entire ecosystem that is
Corporations in
associated with
general.
it. Yeah. They have everything on their hands. They have the ecosystems, they have the money, they have the capacity to get things done. If they want to be sustainable, show that they can be sustainable.
Give you my example.
Lead by example. I published a paper about that I can share with you. Demonstrated, using all the numbers, that the Brazilian sector should lead this process and show how to get things done, how to protect natural ecosystems and be productive and be economically feasible, viable all long term. But again, they always missing the opportunity. I don't know why.
As we say in Brazil, we love to miss the opportunity of missing an opportunity.
Yeah.
And the last item in our list of a myth versus reality, quite often an argument that we hear, and that reasons we run the international community, is the idea that the Amazon is the lung of the world. To what extent that's true or not, and to what extent that contributes to to debate about climate change versus and the Amazon, the importance in that context.
What's the meaning of the land of the world?
Lung.
Land.
Of
Yeah. Yeah, we know that's not the case. The oceans play a more important role. But the Amazon is the core, let's say, one of the most important biodiversity reservoirs in the world. So like Anna was saying, the amounts of genes, traits that existed before us, we cannot imagine. It's huge. We don't know even 10% of the total potential of biodiversity of the region. But I don't think that's the fact, and people know, at least in Brazil and other parts of the world, they see the Amazon has a biodiversity reservoir. They're not talk about the land of the world anymore. At least that's my perception.
That's right.
Do you see that?
Well, in the science world, not really, right? Because it's been shown that, so the idea of the lung of the world was because the amount of photosynthesis that the plants were making in the Amazon. You have so many trees that they're really removing carbon dioxide, remember that, from the atmosphere and putting oxygen, but they are also breathing like us. So they do that, but they also consume the oxygen, otherwise they wouldn't be living. So this thing of there being in the lungs is not valid anymore. It's not seen as valid. However, what is important is they are a major pulsing, living, big chunk of forest that is really regulating climate as a whole and water cycles as a whole globally. So if we imagine a globe with no Amazonia is a pretty horrific world. So in that sense, I feel that there is this global relevance. What I think this clashes is the governance of the Amazon. The Amazon belongs to those countries, right? So there is a relevance that reaches out to everyone, but it's these people's right to deal with that, right? They've been dealing with it poorly. We agree, but so there's that issue of ownership of the land, and goes back to indigenous peoples, right? And how the government of Brazil itself often does not give those indigenous people the governance that they need, or allows their governance to protect their land. So that clash exists very much so. But yeah, the lungs, I don't think we're not using that anymore.
Excellent, because it's a term that we still hear, especially in policy discussions.
Interesting.
Some of our students have mentioned that in their papers.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, interesting.
and
I do feel that textbooks still mention that, right? Websites maybe still mention that. So yes.
Yeah, which is outdated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Activists may use that. I mean, it's very emblematic, right? Again, it's a very strong narrative.
yes.
Goes back to how do you describe the situation?
So now we are stopping the transmission, and then we're going to have a more open conversation. Always like to remind our students here that we operate under Patent House rules. So the idea that I can discuss it really, and you reduce any ideas that we talk about here today, but without citing sources, so that